Hello and welcome to another edition of the Consumer Quarter. I'm Simon Palin. On the show today, authorities warn mobile phone companies to prevent customers from being shocked by the size of their bills.
Time's come to step up and look after your customers.
And developers respond to growing demand for pet-friendly residential buildings. But first, food makers say when it comes to desserts, Australian taste buds are pushing flavour boundaries like never before. Top chefs and restaurateurs say these days a bowl of vanilla ice cream or a piece of chocolate cake is simply not good enough. Our curiosity for new and varied sweet treats was very much on show at this year's Fine Food Fair in Sydney. It's often so hard to decide which ice cream flavour to try. Now there's another one to consider, beer-flavoured ice cream with real beer.
Mixed it up with a Crown Lager and people won't believe it, and when they taste it they think, wow, this is unbelievable, can we have a pot or can we have a schooner?
Why not combine two unhealthy things, alcohol and gelato ice cream in one?
Yeah, there you go, and it's a nice cleanser between meals.
And there's another option for those who appreciate yeast in their dessert, Vegemite ice cream.
I think a lot of people kind of try to understand that the Vegemite is on toast. Well, what's it doing in an ice cream or a gelato?
Vegemite and dairy wouldn't immediately strike in consumers' minds as something that would go well together, would it?
No, but everyone that's tasted it are absolutely gobsmacked.
Everyone except me.
Vegemite?
Vegemite?
Interesting. Yeah, I've had enough of that one. Now here's a similar theme to Vegemite ice cream. This is dessert with soy sauce. Tell us why.
Well, ours is a naturally brewed soy sauce. It takes 6 months to brew it. During the brewing process, it develops really complex flavours of its own, so over 280 flavours of its own, and a lot of those match with chocolate, citrus and vanilla. So if anybody's heard of balsamic strawberries, chili chocolate, same principle.
And speaking of chili chocolate, Kirsten Tibbles claims to be one of the first Australians to make it.
A very long time ago. I think it was about 17 years ago now.
And that's really cottoned on now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the Aztecs are the first people who did it, obviously, when they mixed cocoa with chili, but it wasn't chocolate then.
And for chocolate lovers really trying to test their taste buds,
You can get anchovies and chocolate and goat's cheese and chocolate and things like that as well.
What does that say about the Australian consumer that we're demanding this sort of thing?
I think we're really, which is fantastic, a multicultural society which demands different products, and we're always looking for something new, although we still do love the classic flavours, strawberries and cream and hazelnuts and things like that as well.
Kirsten Tibbles ending that story, and you may have heard about another very challenging addition to the range of interesting ice cream types available. Earlier this year, a restaurant in London began serving ice cream made from breast milk. Each serving of the dessert, called Baby Gaga, was on sale for £14. The ice cream sold out very quickly, but after complaints from some members of the public, authorities stepped in and banned the product from being sold. Well, the ever-expanding range of dessert options, of course, does Australia's growing obesity problem no favours. A conference in Brisbane has been told a tax on foods high in sugar and fat could be the answer. The super-calorie tax is one of the ideas being put forward by a visiting obesity expert. But some nutritionists say it would do little to battle the nation's bulge. Here's the ABC's Lauren Day.
As Australia's waistline bulges, the cost of obesity is growing.
There is an increased risk of heart disease, an increased risk of stroke.
With more than 2/3 of Australian adults at risk from being overweight or obese, experts are asking whether junk food really should be as cheap as chips.
In some countries, in fact a couple of countries in Europe, what they're thinking about is actually having a tax on sugar solutions, sugary drinks and crisps and things like that, which have huge numbers of calories, largely wasteful calories, and decreasing the tax on fruit and healthier foods.
Professor Wass says a similar system could help beat the bulge down under, and the proof is in the pudding.
I'd probably move for the healthy foods if there was a tax.
I don't tend to buy a lot of junk food as it is, and I certainly wouldn't buy it if there was a tax on it.
But some nutritionists say taxing foods doesn't stop people from buying them.
Taxing food is a difficult issue because often tax will target a lower socioeconomic group who are the most vulnerable group from a financial point of view anyway.
Professor Wass also says Australia should consider banning junk food advertising during children's television and make companies that sell high-energy foods invest in obesity research, giving the government food for thought.
And the government has been given more food for thought by the Cancer Council. It's suggesting obesity levels could be cut by banning the use of cartoon characters on what it says are unhealthy children's foods. The charity says at the moment nearly 3/4 of these characters are associated with foods high in salt, sugar or fat.
What we're seeing is the foods that are really designed to appeal to children are exactly the sorts of foods that are going to be increasing their waistlines.
The Cancer Council wants cartoon characters used to make healthier options look more attractive. Well, given the state of the retail sector and tough economic times, consumers don't have too many reasons to feel optimistic these days. But there was a surprise lift in consumer confidence in September. The Westpac Melbourne Institute Index shows sentiment rose more than 8%. Economists say the increase is significant.
Well, I think it's the recognition that the Reserve Bank is no longer threatening to raise interest rates. And that's only something that's come about in the last month or so.
And despite the rise, the index still remains at a relatively weak level overall. Well, despite the gloomy times for retailers, Westfield has opened its latest and most ambitious project to date, the biggest urban shopping centre in Europe. Its latest centre runs right alongside the London 2012 Olympic site, but it's also in the middle of one of the poorest parts of the city. Here's the ABC's Emma Alberici.
It's more a city than a shopping centre, a bowling alley, cinema, 70 restaurants, even a casino. But the biggest gamble came for Westfield's Lowy family, a $2 billion investment in one of the poorest parts of London.
This will be the biggest shopping centre in Europe, not just in the United Kingdom. And we're incredibly excited about that. We're on a very special site. As you can see behind me is the Olympic Stadium.
A big name act drew in the crowds for the opening day. 75% of visitors for the Olympics will be forced to walk through Westfield to get there.
We've been so excited about the opening of this, much more so than the Olympics.
Yeah, when the going gets tough,
we're helping the economy by spending.
Probably the biggest disappointment for the company is that while there is an international rail link here, so far none of the operators from France or Belgium have agreed to send their trains. So for the time being at least, it's unlikely that shoppers from continental Europe will be ducking over to spend their money at Westfield.
The number of mobile phone text messages sent is expected to top 3.5 billion this year, and that's just in the Asia Pacific alone. A new report from an independent telco firm, Ovum, says that's an increase of 14% on last year. However, the report also finds that texting will soon begin to decline as alternate internet messaging solutions like social networks make their mark. And many of us who are big mobile phone users know the feeling of getting a phone bill which is much higher than what we expected. The technical term for this is bill shock, and it's a growing problem. So much so, authorities are stepping in. The federal government's watchdog, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, or ACMA, is warning phone companies to clean up their act or face stiff penalties. For more on this, I spoke to ACMA's Claire O'Reilly.
The problem that many consumers don't understand or don't realise is that the amount that they're charged within their plan is very much discounted to when they exceed their plan, and so the cost might be 3 times higher once you've used up your included value, and that leads to the high shock.
And this is becoming quite a widespread issue, isn't it?
It has. The Ombudsman sees many of these complaints coming through, and so do the providers. We know that many consumers are complaining to their provider that they just didn't know that they were going to incur those sort of costs.
And what can people do to avoid it?
One thing is to understand the rates that are actually being charged. So if a consumer knows that if they use up all their call value, they're actually going to be charged more, they can monitor their usage. And similarly with data, downloading a movie, if you do it within the plan, you can afford it. If you do it outside the plan, it can often be 3 or 4 times higher. So keeping an eye on that, understanding what the charges are for your product, and keeping informed, going online and checking what the usage is during that billing period.
And should the mobile phone companies be doing anything to try and stamp this out too?
We think they should, Simon. One of the things that we're asking is that the telcos give their customers a tool that will help them to manage their expenditure. So send them a text and say, hey, you're up to 50% of your contract, or 80% of your plan, I should say, and let them know where they're up to. And when they get to 95%, tell them that if they keep going, then they might incur more costs.
The mobile phone companies might not necessarily want to do that. They might be benefiting from bill shock.
Look, that's right. We think that they do want to help their customers, and we think it's about good customer care practices. So we'd be really calling on industry to say, time's come to step up and look after your customers, and that's one easy way that they can do that.
Makes sense. Claire O'Reilly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Simon.
That's Claire O'Reilly from the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Well, finally today, a story about pets. Getting a foot on the property ladder is becoming increasingly difficult for those with a four-legged friend, and that's driving demand for pet-friendly buildings. Here's Nicole Chettle.
There's no doubt Australia's a nation of pet lovers, but as high-density living becomes the norm in many parts of the country, man's best friend isn't always welcome. In Sydney's leafy eastern suburbs, one agent estimates that just 3 in 10 properties on the market allow animals.
They will pay a premium for property that is pet friendly.
Catherine Freeman knows all too well how tough it can be for dog lovers to sniff out a good deal, particularly for renters.
They won't have a dog in that situation, and sometimes the agents aren't prepared to rent properties to people with dogs.
But with a soccer-playing dog, dubbed David Beckham, life without a canine companion is out of the question. And business is listening. The property developer Lendlease built this complex with pets in mind, and catering to a niche market doesn't cost a bomb.
There was a growing demand for people to want to bring their pets along with them after they downsized. It wasn't really going to cost us any more money. We were going to deliver the parks and so on. Putting in the doggy-doo bins and things of that nature was just that little bit extra.
There are more pets in Australia than people, but accommodating both can be doggone difficult. While some have legitimate concerns about noise and mess, the Companion Animal Council says the benefits outweigh the risks, and pet-friendly policies can help control issues that might otherwise be driven underground.
That's Nicole Chettle there, and that's all for this edition of the Consumer Quarter. Thanks very much for joining us. If you've got any story ideas or just an interesting consumer insight, please feel free to get in touch on Facebook. Search for the Consumer Quarter page and click like if you want to be kept up to date. And I'll see you next time.